Good afternoon. Welcome back to the channel. This video is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. Do your own research, make your own decisions. All right, guys, welcome back. So I got a lot to cover in this video, and it will start out as a general conversation about blockchain and distributed ledger systems and their adoption globally and where that stands today. And that's a debatable thing. But throughout the rest of the video, it will trend more towards ICP specific topics. All right. Now, with global adoption, a big issue with this conversation in the crypto space is that over the last few years, most people that cover this space have largely ignored any and all adoption that's happened with institutions. And we have seen examples where some crypto company and some corporation puts out some announcement, and we find out later it's primarily just marketing and PR and no substance to it. So we've seen numerous examples like that. For the most part, at this point, August 2024, those examples have been noted, but there's been tons of other examples where they got no coverage and you would have to go look into it for yourself. And so like outside of like the one-off, posts that certain content creators make, there hasn't been a lot of in-depth comprehensive coverage of this with large corporations. And you would have to individually just run a list of the 500 largest corporations in the world, and you'd have to just go one by one and start looking into all of them and seeing if they're reporting that they're doing anything with blockchain and distributed ledger systems. And what I found out was that tons of them were openly saying, yes, we're using this technology. And however, it's difficult on our end to know the extent because we're not given the access and the insight to know for sure. Like we're not going to be invited, into their headquarters and have their tech team walk us through how they have their whole tech stack and everything else. It's like we're not going to get that level of insight. And so you kind of have to just keep up with everything to the best of your ability and use, your best judgment. I would argue things are further along than what most people realize. It is hard to know for sure, but the reason why I'm going over this is because like I look at everything with the entire industry and the market through my own general assessment of where the adoption cycle is. I don't look at the market and then work back from there. Like a lot of people do that in this space. They'll look at the market, prices are down and or flat. And so they assume that, well, if anything was really happening, if there was real development happening with this network, or if there was real adoption happening, prices would be going up. So because prices are not going up and or they're going down, that means there's no adoption happening. People do that. I think the majority of people do that in this space. And so they work backwards from the market is their main and only indicator, right? And so the disconnect between like my general perception on where everything is and most everybody else, like the disconnect is so wide. I have a hard time talking to people in crypto about what's going on with this whole space and with all this technology. But I think, so this is what we're talking about, right? Blockchain distributed ledger systems being incorporated into the existing cloud-based infrastructure. This would technically be the Web 2.5 setup, right? And if you were to go look into a lot of large corporations today, you'd have to individually do this. It does take some time. A lot of them are openly saying they're already using the tech. And we've seen other things like, Franklin Templeton, meeting with Danelle Dixon from Stellar and them openly having like a 30-minute long conversation. Franklin Templeton filing paperwork through federal regulators when they started using Stellar and Polygon. And a number of other things. Like, for example, this was back in 2020 when Microsoft put this out. And I think that now that I better understand what's happening with web standards and with decentralized identifiers and with verifiable credentials likely on its way to becoming a web standard, I think that serves as corroborated evidence that many of the things we've seen over the last few years has been legitimate. It's been real. It's not like they're not all just coordinating together and this is all they're just making up fake announcements that aren't getting any public attention, right? Most of the ones that were just PR and marketing got tons of attention in the crypto space. But so many other examples got absolutely no coverage whatsoever. And better understanding the web standards and how making DIDs a web standard. I'm not suggesting that making DIDs a web standard calls for the mass implementation of blockchain and distributed ledger systems, but I would say that it it creates a much more friendly environment, and it further incentivizes this type of technology being used. That's probably a better way to put it. Further incentivizes blockchain and distributed ledger systems being adopted and implemented when you make DIDs a web standard, and especially if you make verifiable credentials a web standard, which I think is coming. And so seeing that with the entity that oversees standards for the web, like this is the entity that overseas standards for the web. And so the fact that they're making those changes at the same time where we're seeing all these things with these large corporations, I would argue that that's corroborated evidence that what we have seen, to those who have actually done their own research. I'm not talking to the people that didn't actually look into all this stuff, and now they're just going to say today, oh, it's all fake. None of that's happening because the market's down. Like, those people should just get the fuck away from my channel, because they're lost and they'll figure out whenever they figure out. But, you know, I would argue that I think a lot of what we've seen over the last few years has been legitimate, and it's been corroborated with other institutions like the World Wide Web Consortium. That's what I see. But it is still hard to know today exactly how far along things are. Now, moving into the next part of this thought experiment, because most people, okay, let's just say, and I used this about a year ago, maybe 6 months ago. Let's just say, sitting here today, that Twitter or X, or YouTube or whatever social apps you use, okay, Discord, Telegram, and your bank, 4 or 5 apps that you use. Let's just say, speaking hypothetically, that they were to add a new login feature that incorporated some type of blockchain system, right? And that Twitter were to move payments to blockchain rails, and that your bank were to do the same. Now, there wouldn't be a whole lot of heavy lifting on your end, right? You're just making a couple extra clicks or different types of clicks or so on and so forth. It could be built into the user interface and everything else. But if that were to happen, let's just say that were to happen over the next 6 to 12 months, right? So they were to move to this type of a model, just incorporate some type of layer 1 blockchain system, whatever it is. If that were to happen, people would automatically assume that adoption was significantly further ahead than what it is right now, right? If those just few things were to happen. And my case would be that in the big scheme of things, that wouldn't even be a whole lot of, there wouldn't be a whole lot of things required to even get that up and running, I don't believe. Maybe it probably have to go gradually, just not like all at once. So it'd probably have to be a phased implementation. But if things like that were to happen, people would automatically assume, oh man, all this is moving forward. But because many of the software applications, like the social media type apps, our bank and things of that nature, because we're not seeing a lot of these things being incorporated into software systems we already use, I think it makes it hard to know definitively how far along things are, right? But what I would suggest is that those things could happen anytime, really, right? There's not, that wouldn't require but so much behind the scenes, technical development to happen. And I think that when you look at what's happening right now with identity and how OpenAI is put this out the other day talking about personhood credentials. So one of the most notable artificial intelligence companies on earth puts this out talking about personhood credentials and specifically referencing cryptography, right? Zero knowledge proof technology as well. And then I see where the FTC bans fake online reviews, inflated social media influence. So that ties into bots, fake accounts, identity, artificial intelligence. And then I see where the Malaysian government adopts WorldCoin for a proof of humanity digital identification. WorldCoin's biometric ID system aims to tackle AI-related challenges in Malaysia through blockchain-based iris scans, right? And so regardless of anybody's feelings or opinions about all of these things happening, what I'm seeing is, and when you add on top of that the W3C and the standards, when I see all these things happen in like 24 hours, okay, I think we may be heading to the first universal use case, which would be a identity solution. And the reason why I thought payments was going to be the first universal use case. And that's why I had to rework my thesis like a couple years ago. But I thought it was going to be payments. Now I kind of think it's going to be an identity solution. And the reason why that would be significant is because it further ties us into all of the new technology. Like it further ties us into this model. If blockchain, distributed ledger systems, cryptography are going to be included in all these identity-based solutions, all these personhood, proof of humanity, right? And if it's going to be tied into the solutions to getting rid of bots, which it looks like it is, and if it's going to be married to AI, which it also looks like it is, it's all further moving us in this direction. Okay. And it looks like we're in the early stages of seeing this identity solution, verifiable credentials, whatever you want to call it. It looks like we're in the early stage implementation of that, meaning that it's starting right now. Okay. So this ban is about to go into place in like a month or two, which is going to ban, fake influence through botting your accounts. I do think this will be a process. First, it happens with regulation. Then it kind of trickles down to corporations start adopting new solutions, making changes, things of that nature. But I think that what we're seeing right now is the early stages of this proof of humanity digital identity solution being rolled out, which is only going to further push us in the direction of all the new technology. So, yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to start, and I just want to highlight one more time. I would really stress focusing on where you believe, because it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have the same assessment and the same perspective that I do on this. You might think adoption is significantly further ahead. You might think it's significantly further behind. Whatever your conclusion, I would recommend taking that into consideration. Don't solely just look at the market and use that as your only indicator. The market really doesn't tell you very much at all. For the most part, prices don't do anything for long periods of time, and then they'll shoot up. So yeah. I look at the adoption cycle, things that are happening, new potential regulation, things like this, right? Potential web stand. Like these are the things that I'm looking at to gauge where everything is on a global stage. Okay, let's start to transition into the more ICP specific part, because it all does tie in together, okay, of the video. Guys, starting to notice that there are multiple cross-chain solutions that are using canisters. And I think you're going to see more of this. I think the best cross-chain solutions are going to use canisters because canisters have overwhelmingly more functionality and it offers these different protocols more options. Okay. Their value proposition to the market is the fact that they're using canister technology and they have all the additional functionality. All right. And so now we're seeing tap protocol. And guys, look at this. Like this is network effects in action. And this is how ICP scales, in my opinion. So this is a guy, and apparently he's a Bitcoin maxi. That's how he has him, how he describes himself on his Twitter account. He says, I can guarantee every single one of you, if you invest in the only true protocol on Bitcoin, track BTC right now, and jump on tap early, you'll be financially free in 1 or 2 years from now. And so this guy has like 60-some thousand followers, right, on Twitter. And he also shared this from dfinity. And so you're going to see more and more of this. But also, they might not overly promote ICP all the time. And, it's going to happen, okay? You're going to see more and more. If canisters weren't such a big deal, you wouldn't be seeing things like this, okay? The reason why they're using canisters is because of the functionality, because it's the only place they can go to get that functionality in the space, because canisters are in a class of their own right now in this entire industry. But this was 2.5 years ago, guys. This is how long it takes for these things to develop. When I was talking about, this was on my old Twitter account that's still banned, how, the full integration with Bitcoin was the biggest thing happening in the space that nobody was talking about. This was 2.5 years ago, just because of the direct integration, no third-party middleware, the canisters being able to act as end users and sign transactions on those other networks. It's like, this is so far advanced from the third-party bridge model that everybody else is using. But And so 2.5 years later, now we're starting to see the solutions come out. That's the point that I'm making. I'm going back to the whole introducing the element of time. It was very easy to see back here that this was going to be a very big deal and it was going to be used across the entire space. But it's taken 2.5 years for many of these solutions to start developing, materializing, and start launching and, getting out there, getting more users, creating new network effects, creating new solutions, so on and so forth. But you're going to see more of this, okay? In my opinion, all of the best cross-chain solutions are going to use canisters. So, okay. Then this was from Franklin Templeton, and they put this out, and I'm not going to go too deep into this. I just want to highlight that they're tying blockchain and AI. They're marrying both of those technologies together in all reality. Okay, if you read through this article, which I would recommend reading through this was put out on the Franklin Templeton Digital Asset Twitter account a few days ago, but it just talks about the predicted growth of AI and blockchain, and it also talks about the synergy between the two technologies and how they complement each other, and I would argue they do, and that's evident by everything that you're seeing. The rollout is kind of happening in tandem with AI and with blockchain, right? And so both AI and blockchain markets are projected to experience rapid growth in the next 10 years. Imagine the potential if they combine forces, right? And so it just shows you both their projected growth over the next 10 plus years. But when you look at what the W3C is doing, I think that just further suggests that these technologies are a package deal. Not saying that they had to be a package deal, but just based on how they have all this set up, it looks like they are going to be a package deal. Now, just some things with ICP specific, guys. I know that, again, but people are looking at the market and working backwards, in my opinion. If you were to really look at so many different extremely important metrics like developer activity, guys. I mean, this was for the last 6 months, but if you were to go out over the last 12 months, I think it's still ICP is at the top in the entire space out of everybody. Never had a bull market, barely get covered by the crypto media. I'm one of the main influencers that covers this thing, and it still has overwhelmingly more developer activity than anybody else. On top of that, I would argue, guys, that ICP's corporate and institutional adoption, that they have more significant examples of institutional adoption than like the examples that have happened. I would argue that those are more significant than most other networks in space. I'm going to go through some of them here in a second. But this was from one of the Twitter accounts in the ICP space. 1 year ago, the 90-day average cycle burn rate on ICP was around 2 to 3 billions per second. Today, it's up to 11 plus billions per second. And so just showing, the cycle burn rate increased by 3 or 4 times just over the last year, which is very significant in my opinion. And when you look at things like canisters going up and to the right, when you look at things like chain key assets going up and to the right, more cross-chain solutions that are using canisters. And don't forget about things like the fact that Lugano has adopted CKBTC. I'm not suggesting that it's being used widely or anything like that. I'm just saying that they already have good relationships in Switzerland and in Lugano. And as the broader technology starts being adopted more, I do think you'll see things like CKBTC being used more in Switzerland, in Lugano, and in different South American countries too, okay? Just in the early years. The adoption part itself and getting those relationships built is such a big critical component, because whenever this does start to mainstream and payments do move to blockchain rails, right now, for the most part, it's just people who know about the tech and think it's the future, and so they're going to start using it. But once payments globally move to blockchain-based rails, that's when all this stuff is going to be very significant. And then when we're talking about the adoption that has happened up until this point, so let's really go through this, okay? So the VRC platform, you have BIHA, an institution that looks like they're going to be on the forefront with renewable energy, with smart cities, and they're in Dubai, or they're in the UAE, which is going to be one of the crypto tech hubs of the world, it looks like, right? So you have them involved here. And the platform's already created. All right. You also have Rollenberger, large global consulting firm. And again, this was at the United Nations Climate Conference. On top of that, you have other developments with the United Nations and other entities within the United Nations, right? So this was the UNDP partnering with Dfinity, right? And see, the Monetary Authority, this was in collaboration with the Monetary Authority of Singapore and other strategic partners, but it talks about starting in Cambodia, right? And then how this is going to be like a multi-country initiative. But guys, I'm telling you, I think I would argue these examples, and when you go through all of them, I would argue ICP has as significant institutional adoption as most other layer ones, if probably more so. There's a few that you could kind of, there's some nuance there. You'd have to kind of compare and contrast and look at the use cases and the potential scale and everything else. But what they've been able to accomplish and the adoption that they have got up until this point, it looks like the United Nations, regardless of what anybody thinks about the United Nations, is very friendly towards Dfinity and ICP. There's 3 different examples with 3 different United Nations sectors just over the last year. Okay. So you have the VRC platform, you have everything with universal trusted credentials. And the fact that this announcement with universal trusted credentials comes out at the same time where the W3 standards are changing, where you're seeing these things come out from OpenAI, from the FTC trying to get rid of bots and fake accounts and fake influence, and the Malaysian government adopting a proof of humanity solution. The fact that this came out in the midst of all those other things happening, it looks like this is going to be a big deal, and this aligns with all the other changes that we're seeing and the other conversations that we're seeing that I just went over. Okay. United Nations Knowledge Foundation and Dfinity join forces, haven't really gotten a whole lot of coverage of this in a general sense, and the details are kind of vague, but this was described as a 3-year partnership to fundamentally transform education, right? And I haven't even mentioned the other part that came up at COP28 about the government of Manipur, right? The government of Manipur using ICP as part of their education system for teachers' credentials and for credentials and things of that nature. And then, Metalore, Origin, gold is a multi-trillion-dollar market. Metalore is one of the largest players in the world. They're already using Origin, okay? But if you go look at much of the gold that they're selling on their website, it has the same design. So, and there's others that I could go over as well, right? Everything that's happened with Singularity Net, we're starting to see more companies, more crypto companies start to use canister technology. And it's unclear exactly what's going to happen after this merger happened with Singularity Net, Fetch AI, and Ocean Protocol. It's kind of unclear about the future of how ICP is going to be incorporated into this. But he said specifically, and this was when the merger happened, cross-chain, including ETH, FET Layer 1, ADA, and Hypercycle, plus more, including, likely ICP, because somebody asked him, I believe, would it be cross-chain? But if you want to do AI on-chain, you're going to be using ICP, right? And so I would just pay attention to when you see new adoption of canister technology within the crypto space itself, all right? But the big takeaway of this video, in my opinion, is that 1, I think it's worth considering things are further along than what you might assume, unless you think things are further along already. But I would just remain open to it. And I'm very flexible with my perception on how far along all this is and open to change with new information, right? I had to adjust my big picture thesis like a year and a half, 2 years ago, just because I had a better understanding of ICP's tech, how all this could come together. I started looking through more of the issues with trying to roll out digital payments in the US and what that would be like. But I do think that we're on the way to a universal use case in crypto. And I think it's going to be identity solution and then payments. And it could be something very simple, like just the applications that you use. You have some new login feature. It's like a couple additional clicks, but there could be mass onboarding events that happen in the blockchain space through regulation, through economic conditions, right? And it looks like we're trending in that direction. All the right institutions are involved here. Yeah. Couple more things, and that's going to be it. But I wanted to go over this too. So I didn't look into, I thought some of these were just smaller tech firms or, I did not know that if you look across the data centers where many ICP no machines are at, a lot of these data centers are the leading data centers in the world. Like if you look up the industry leaders in this space, you're going to see a lot of similar names when you go and look at the data centers that ICP nodes are at, right? No machines are at. And so I thought that was very significant. And Drowning made a post about that too, just talking about the level of security at those facilities. And that's another thing that would be taken into consideration if somebody was looking at a solution like ICP. They would take infrastructure into the conversation. And I didn't even go over this the other day when I was going through the video, just talking about everything that it would be the best solution for like a digital identity solution, for a payment solution, and then for a Bitcoin scale. I didn't even get into infrastructure, but infrastructure would be another key component here. And the fact that these node machines are spread out throughout numerous different leading data centers across the entire world, it only further differentiates ICP from everything else, in my opinion, right? Because a lot of these their networks don't even have their own hardware. They have no infrastructure built out. You can't even build applications on it, okay? So lot that I covered. That's all I have for this video. Let me know if I got anything wrong because I was trying to jump all over the place. But I think things are further along than what people realize. And I think that we could go through an acceleration period sometime in the next few years with everything that we've been discussing: identity, artificial intelligence, regulation, all these things, cyber threats. So that's all I have for this video. Thank you everyone for sharing, subscribing. Take care. Have a good day. I'll see you in the next video.